Let's take a few minutes to discover the power of presets as well as profiles in Camera Raw. I'm going to select this portrait as well as the sheep. Use Command R on Mac, Control R on Windows to go to Camera Raw and then select the sheep.dng file. We'll start with profiles. So, a profile is a set of instructions that determine how the information in a file is processed. So, we can think of a profile as setting the base interpretation of the image. Basically, it's the starting point for all of your other adjustments. And every raw image must have a profile applied, and it can only have one profile applied at a time. So, if we select a different profile, that's going to remove the one that was previously applied. And profiles are non destructive, so we can change them at any time and we won't ever lose any quality. Now, when we're working with raw files, Adobe's default profile is Adobe Color for color images, and it is Adobe Monochrome for black and white images. Now, if you're working with JPEG files, a profile is going to be applied when that JPEG file is created. So, probably in camera or on your mobile device. And the profile that you'll see here, it will just say monochrome or color. It won't say Adobe in front of it. And that's one way to know, if you didn't already, that you were working with a JPEG file. All right, we can select from a number of different profiles. Adobe Color, like I mentioned, that's a great starting point. That is the default profile that Adobe Camera Raw will apply. The Adobe Landscape profile, that's excellent when working with landscapes because it's going to add saturation to all of the colors in the image. And it's also going to just enhance the blues and the greens in the image. And it adds a little bit of contrast to the overall image. Plus, it compresses your highlights and shadows so that you can actually get more detail out of those areas, which is typically important with landscape photography because you don't always have control over the light. The next profile is Adobe Neutral. You may not see this profile in your drop-down menu. That's because I use it quite often and I've marked it as a favorite. We'll talk more about favorites in just a moment. For now, just know that the neutral profile is going to give you the most room to create your own edits because it reduces color saturation and it renders a flatter, lower contrast version of the image. Then there's Adobe Portrait, tailored especially for portrait images. It has a more gentle tone curve, so a little less contrast, and it really renders better skin tones. Next is the Adobe Vivid. This also adds contrast. It's sort of on the other end of the spectrum from Adobe Neutral. And it's designed to make landscape images more dynamic, so it adds contrast and saturation while still rendering more natural skin tones if you have a person in that landscape. All right, let's see what these different profiles look like on a portrait. Here, the default is Adobe Color. When I switch it to landscape, we can see all of a sudden I have too much contrast, too much saturation in those skin tones. Neutral will give me a very flat rendering. Adobe Portrait, though, does a very good job, much more realistic skin tones. And then Adobe Vivid, again, good skin tones, but a lot more contrast and a little bit more saturation. So in this case, I prefer the portrait. Okay, let's return to the sheep image. Now, to access additional profiles, we can either select Browse at the bottom of the Favorites menu, or we can click on the Browse icon. Here at the top, we have all of the raw profiles. I'll go ahead and close that for a moment. And you can also view this by a list as opposed to a grid. It's up to you. For now, I'll leave it set to grid. Underneath that is camera matching. Now, these profiles will match the settings if you set them on the back of your camera. So depending on which camera you have, the list here will probably vary. Now, there's a little line here that is separating the raw profiles from the more creative profiles. So if you are working with JPEG files, you won't be able to apply these raw profiles to them. Instead, you'll only be able to apply the creative profiles. So let's take a look at some of the artistic profiles. We can just hover our cursor on top of any of these in order to get a preview. And if we like one of the profiles, we'll just click on it in order to apply it. If I think I'm going to use this profile often, I can click to add it to my favorites. And depending on the profile, you may or may not see an amount slider pop up. This can help tone back the profile or amplify it and give it an even stronger look. When I'm finished, I can click on back. We can see the profile that's been applied as well as the amount. Now, for now, I'm going to switch this back to landscape while we look at some different presets. I'll click on the preset icon here. We can see there are a number of different premium presets here that ship by default with Adobe Camera Raw. And you'll also notice there's this defaults area here. I'm going to use the disclosure triangle because presets can range from just adjusting even one slider, like adding a vignette, to giving your image a completely different look by adjusting all sorts of sliders. So, a more simple preset would be the ones that we find under the defaults. If, for example, I just want to correct any lens distortion and set my profile to Adobe Landscape, I can just select one of these presets. If I want my lens corrections applied, but I want to use the Adobe Portrait profile, I can select this preset. So with one click, I can actually change multiple settings when I apply a preset. In fact, if we go back to the edit stack and we look, we can see that the eye icon is highlighted, meaning that changes have been made to the optics panel. And sure enough, both of these options have been enabled and the Adobe Landscape profile has been applied because I used that preset. Okay, returning to some of these premium presets, I'm just going to use the landscape presets here. And when I roll my cursor over any of these presets, we can see the changes that they've made. So let's say I like, for instance, this preset. I'll go ahead and apply it. And just as we did a moment ago, I can now return to the edit stack and see all of the different values that were changed in all of the different panels. So this is a great way if you find a preset and you like the effect to go in and find out how that effect was created by looking at all of the different settings that have been changed in all of the different panels. Now, the best part I think about both profiles as well as presets is that there's no right or wrong answer. It just depends on how you want your image to look. And because they're all non destructive, you can always refine or remove any of the settings at any time. For now, I'll choose Done and return to Bridge.